Thanks so much for that generous introduction. I first want to thank Uncle Moogie for the gorgeous welcome to this country, to Ghana country. It is a magical part of the world. We are so privileged to spend time on it. And thanks to Auntie Sue too for the ongoing solidarity and that recognition of how much of this struggle is grounded in First Nations struggle. We were just up barely a week ago now on Arundel land. And walking in solidarity with traditional owners there, walking up to shut that base, to shut Pine Gap. And as you walked up with elders, and it was one of those moments which sort of sends a chill down your spine, walking together with elders and traditional owners whose family connections went back generations and generations and generations. As you did that walk and you confronted the facility there in Pine Gap, you realise just how shallow the roots of the American empire here are, just how shallow the roots of Pine Gap and how deep the roots of traditional owners and First Nations peoples is on this country. Let's remember that because it's just the way it is. And as we start with our acknowledgement, to remember who's been on the front line of this now. Who was on the front line of the Montebello explosions and Emu Field and Maralinga? It was First Nations peoples. They've seen their land and their country poisoned. They've seen their families poisoned. And they have been the ones too fighting against nuclear waste dumps, sometimes alone, sometimes with allies. So let's acknowledge at the core of this is a First Nation struggle for this country. And Abby, you'll be pleased to know, Sue whispered to me when you finished your speech, she whispered to me, when she said Yankee go home, you can actually stay. You can actually stay. Thank you so much for the presentation. You're welcome anytime. So, I mean, you know, sitting here or standing here and looking in a room full of people who actually seem to want a future of peace, right? To have a country that controls its own destiny, that doesn't turn a blind eye or even be complicit in a genocide, that isn't feeding war and conflict. We've got a room full of people who want this country to be better and the world to be peaceful. That is something to celebrate, I've got to tell you. Thank you for coming here. And when I compare standing in front of you to sitting in front of a room full of generals and defence officials and Labor members and One Nation members and Coalition members in the federal parliament, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. But it does sometimes, you're sitting there, you're in the room, and you've got people whose entire careers, highly paid careers, you know, they've got the gold braid on their shoulders and the superannuation and the pensions, and it's full of this room of them, right? And you sometimes think, am I losing touch with reality? Like, because they have a plan. They actually have a plan. It seems crazy. It seems like unbelievable that is their plan, but they have a plan. And their plan is to enmesh our industrial base, enmesh our research base, enmesh it into the US military and make it, in their terms, interoperable with the US military. So that when we build or pay for or create weapons of war, they can just slot into the US war machine and fight anywhere on the planet with them. And they have a plan that our strategic direction and our role in the world won't be directed actually by Canberra, but we'll just follow along what the US tells us to do in a sort of mixture of awe and fear that seems to sort of this combining this kind of weird position where they're in awe of the United States and they're fearful of the United States and they follow it along. And you know, when I think about how pathetic our government and worse has been on Gaza, watching this real-time genocide happen, you know, and for me and for billions of people across the planet, the mask of the US military and the mask of Western military has really been ripped down, and we've seen it roar there in Gaza at an obscene cost to the Palestinian people. But we've seen it, right? We've seen it. And if you want to know why we keep putting weapons parts into it and giving the Israeli government cover, and you're refusing to sanction their war industry and put armoured steel into their war industry, why we're part of that, comes back to this same thing, our relationship with the United States, our toxic, mendicant relationship with the United States. And if we want to be a voice for peace in Palestine or Lebanon or Iran, if we want to speak out against war with China, if we want this planet on the right trajectory, the thing we need to do here in this country is free ourselves from the United States, and it starts with ending AUKUS. That's the truth of it. I am going to travel across some of the ground that both Abby and Richard have taken us across, because I think it's important to realise what this means for us now. Because the plan with AUKUS, you know, we see the nuclear submarines and almost $400 billion. We think, what else we could do with $400 billion? And we could do pretty much anything amazing with that. You know, wipe out Hexstead, build a home for everyone who needs it, you know, and get dental into Medi. We'll do all of that with the $400 billion. It's extraordinary. But we're pumping it into these nuclear submarines. And will we get them, won't we get them? That could be a whole day's conference on the bizarre unlikelihood of that actually ripening. And you know, in some ways, as awful as that is, it's almost a distraction from what's really happening here. It's almost this extremely, obscenely expensive distraction from what's happening. Because actually what's happening is in many ways far, far worse than that. It's this enmeshing of Australia in an irreparable way, in a project and a plan and a footprint that is too big to fix, enmeshing us in this next US war. And the next US war that those people in that room, with the gold braid and the high salaries and the paid by the public to be guardians of our country, the war they want is that next war with China. And what does it mean? What's it looking like on the ground in Australia? Well, it's looking like us spending $8.5 billion of our public money to build the US a nuclear submarine base just off Perth. And that's going to be up and running next year by 2027. To have 5 US nuclear submarines stationed there, notionally as a joint facility, but you know, we don't own any nuclear submarines, we're unlikely to have any. And it's up and running. Why does the US want that? The US wants that because a base in WA there is like having a couple of free submarines, right? They put 5 of their nuclear submarines there. They've got a shorter trip up and down to make war with China. And instead of having to schlep all the way across the Pacific from San Diego, wasting all that time in travel, we give them some free real estate here and ready access. That's why they want it. That's why we're building it. It's not for Australian submarines. It's going to be serving its purpose, its end purpose, from next year, 2027. And did I mention that the Labor government is spending more than $8 billion of our money to make that happen? It's obscene, right? Yeah. But it's not just that. It's the RAAF Tyndall, just about more than 100k south of Darwin, which used to be an Australian RAAF base, but has been expanded at significant cost to now extend the runway, build the aprons out, so that the US can bring their B-52 bombers and their B-2 bombers here, which are all nuclear capable, position them here so that they've got a flight just over Indonesia to go to war with China. And our government has the courageous position on that of when we say, well, you know, why are you breaching the Treaty of Rarotonga? Why are you allowing nuclear weapons on this country? They say, how dare you politicise this? They say it to you. How dare you politicise this? You know our position. It's a very principled position. We don't ask the US if they have nuclear weapons and they don't tell us. That's our government on our airbase in our country. What the hell is going on here? And Pine Gap, which we know not from what our government has told us, but from whistleblowers who have come out and told us afterwards. Pine Gap has been critical in bringing the intelligence together from the US's global surveillance scheme, getting the targeting information, crunching the data, and then feeding it back to the US and Israel for their targeting and their war in Gaza and Lebanon and Iran. And we apparently do it with full knowledge and concurrence. There are all these bullshit terms that our government comes up with, right? Pine Gap happens with our full knowledge and concurrence. What does that even mean? What it means is the US tell us what they want to tell us. They keep their secrets, and we better shut up and keep paying the bills. That's what it means in Pine Gap. And you heard about Northwest Cape and the spaceport outside Northwest Cape, but Northwest Cape, just, you know, near Broome in WA, its principal role to this base has been the primary communications base with submerged US submarines in our part of the world, this whole half of the world, right? So when Trump or the son of Trump or whoever, at some point, if they press the button to end the world as we know it, we will be the handmaidens of that message, because it'll be pumped into Pine Gap, sent off to Northwest Cape, and then beamed around to their submerged intercontinental ballistic missile fleet, and the world will end. And why are we the handmaidens of that message? What the hell is going on here? Darwin, 2,500 Marines. In rural Victoria, pre-positioning US military equipment. Up in Townsville, marine equipment kept there permanently, ready to go to war with China. Why is it happening in Australia? Well, it's happening in Australia not because the US is showing regional strength or global strength. It's happening in Australia for the reason that Abby touched upon. The US recognises when it does war games, it has significant regional weakness in the Western Pacific. Its bases in Okinawa and Guam, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, in their war games get knocked out in the first 24 hours or so of a war with China. Their bases there, their missile stocks, their military positions, wiped out. And you know, as Abby said, the people of Guam, they didn't ask for this, they oppose it, they want their country back, no choice. The people of Okinawa, they want their island back. They don't want to be destroyed in a US war that they want no part in. They want their island back. I wouldn't mind our continent back either, by the way. But the US see that, right? They can see. And so they've come to us and said, right, you are now the front line. If we lose all of that, if that all disappears, we want to have our pre-positioned military here. We want our bases here. We want our submarines here. We want our fuel depots here. We want our Marines here. And we're going to fight the war from here. And you are going to be the front line. Now, I can understand why the US would say that, right? That's their global interest. I think it's an obscene thing for the American people to be paying for this war. And I support every American who comes up and resists their war machine, and good credit to them for the work they do and the struggle they do. You know, everyone blowing a whistle in Minnesota, pushing back against that war machine in the US. We need allies there. But the US military has a plan, right? For them. But what on earth is our government doing, delivering it for them? And I sit in that room and I look at them and I see them delivering on this plan to make us a part of, an unwilling part of, well, from the Australian people's point of view, but from their point of view, a willing participant in the next US war. And will we have a choice in it? Absolutely not. In fact, Richard Marles 18 months ago at a conference sponsored by those nice people at News Corp, where he felt very comfortable, let out a little slip. He was asked, well, if the US goes to war with China, what will Australia's position be? And he said, well, look, have a look around. Look at all these US bases. Look at our position. We will inevitably be involved in that war. He actually said it. This little accidental truth slipped out of him, and it's what they're building and planning for. And AUKUS submarines, let's assume their optimal pathway number 2 comes good, right? And we get 3 in-service Virginia-class submarines by the end of next decade. That's their plan, 3 submarines. What the bloody use is 3 submarines to us as a sovereign asset? 3 submarines, at any point, one's in dry dock, one's on the way back, and maybe you've got one on position. 1 submarine, right? That's what the plan is over the next decade to be. Obviously, it's not for our defence. It's not intended to be for our defence. It's not a useful asset. It's to slip into a US deployment in the South China Sea, to be one of a number of US assets that sits there and follows Chinese submarines, tracks them and sinks them in the first 24 hours of a conflict. That's what we're paying for. That's what that thing in Osborne's for. That's what the thing's for. Who would be doing this? And as you watch it and you see it, I sometimes think, have I lost track of reality? And then I remembered this is our reality. And our reality is being distorted by the US and by our political leadership and by our defence, and we need to change that reality. We have a country to take back, and maybe take back for the first time ever, and do it together in partnership with First Nations peoples. We have a future to secure. We have a war to not be a part of and a war to avoid, and we want to reimagine our defence policy that extracts us from the United States, stops us spending an obscene amount of monies to join their next war, and instead have a defence force that is about genuinely defending Australia at far less cost and not threatening our neighbours and creating a de-escalation in our region, not a arms race in our region. We call it the Echidna strategy, and we'd love to talk with you more about this, but a strategy about defending Australia and not threatening our neighbours and creating this amazing, I think, positive future where our region sees Australia comfortable in our region, not wanting to go to war or feeling threatened with our region, removing the US force projection from our country, reducing our force projection and saying to our neighbours, this is our defence strategy. It's about defence and not offence. Can you make that your strategy? And I'd love that to catch on in our region with a great reduction in arms spending. And it could be a world-leading thing that Australia can do. So let's end AUKUS. Let's get back our country. Let's do it in partnership with First Nations people, because we have a country to save, a future to save, and as Abby said, the future's not written. Thanks very much.